This is Sir Jun, and ang daming nag-request sa akin to discuss something about the first voyage around the world by Magellan, and that was written by Antonio Pigafetta. So for today's video, we are going to revisit this particular document, and we are going to identify some biases that were presented by Antonio Pigafetta in that particular document. And we are going to analyze this document in line with our interpretation of what really happened during those times and what were those biased presentations in history of the Philippines. This is Sir Jun, and if you're still new to my channel, huwag kalimutang mag-like and subscribe at i-ring mo na rin yung bell down there para ma-updated ka sa lahat ng videos na aking upload. So samahan niyo ako, and welcome to my channel. You know, there will always be room for biases in the history. There will always be room for subjectivity in the writings of history. And this is one of the very reasons why there could be subjective interpretations of the historical presentation depending on the context of the author, the background of the author. Ayan, these are the important things that you have to understand. Kaya nga, in understanding a historical document, we have to undergo first external and internal criticism. Tingnan natin kung sino yung author, sino yung source, at saka para kanino yung pagsulat ng document, to whom was it written. And this is one of the things that we have to understand as we examine the document of the first voyage around the world by Magellan that was written by Antonio Pigafetta. Definitely, the author of the first voyage around the world was Antonio Pigafetta. Now, the question is, sino ba itong si Antonio Pigafetta? So, Antonio Pigafetta was an Italian nobleman. He was a cartographer and geographer. And he was particularly sent by the King of Spain, together with Magellan, to document their voyage to the Eastern Islands. So, isa yun sa very reason why Antonio Pigafetta was one of those men who accompanied Magellan in traversing the oceans. So, makikita natin therefore that Antonio Pigafetta was not writing for the Filipinos. Okay? Take note. Antonio Pigafetta did not write this particular document for the Filipinos, but he was writing this particular document for Spain, para sa mga Europeans, for the King of Spain. Kasi yun yung trabaho niya, to document their voyage, of what really happened during their voyage, and to have some important discoveries being documented. Kaya nga, sabi ng mga historians, ang document na ito is one of the most important writings that speaks something about the pre-colonial society, that speaks something about the pre-colonial Filipinos. But this is the question. Was the presentation of Pigafetta in this document a truth about the Filipinos? Was it not biased? Totoo ba talaga yung mga na-document ni Pigafetta about the Filipinos? You know, I'm not questioning the document itself, but I'm questioning whether the truth of this particular document entirely speaks something about the pre-colonial society that we have as Filipinos. For example, when they passed by, or when these Europeans passed by Marianas Island, which they called as Ladrones Island, ito yung sinulat ni Pigafetta about the people there. These people have no arms, but use sticks which have a fishbone at the end. They are poor, but ingenious, and great thieves, and for the sake of that, we call these three islands the Ladrones Islands. Now, totoo ba itong presentation ni Pigafetta that these people are thieves, are ingenious? What was the basis of Pigafetta? Bakit tinawag nilang ladron? Kasi the word ladron comes from a Spanish term ladron. And that means kawatan, magnanakaw. So, ano yung basihan nila? Why they called these people as indigenous? Ano yung basis nila? This is the bias. Kasi they have judged these people based on physical appearance. Kasi nakita nila mga itim, nakabahag lang. Nakita nila yung mga itsura, yung mga pananamit is not the same as theirs. So, ito yung judgment nila. So basically, this particular judgment or presentation in history is definitely a biased one. Kasi it was based on their perspective as Europeans. Para bang kinumpare nila yung mga tao doon sa kanilang status. Kasi ingenious sila kasi ganito yung itsura nila compared sa atin. We are much educated kasi ganito yung itsura natin. Mukhang malinis tayo sa mga taong ito. So that was one of the biases. Another thing is that Pigafetta came from a noble, a wealthy family. So, from decent family. So, yung presentation niya about the characteristics of those people they met, actually, makikita natin yung bias ng presentations niya. In the writings also, Pigafetta emphasized the nakedness of the Filipino people. You know, and this was something for them, something new for them. And we have to understand that analyzing the context of this presentation, makita natin it was definitely because Pigafetta and the Europeans came from a country that is different from ours. They came from a country which was more developed compared to the Philippines during those times. So, iba talaga yung context, yung background nila compared sa atin. Tapos, when they saw the nakedness of the Filipinos, sinasabi nila, nakabahag. Kasi nakabahag lang talaga yung mga Pilipino noon. Nakita nila. So sabi nila, they are poor. They're ingenious. The question is, tama ba yun? When Pigafetta saw the Filipinos having those indigenous attires, he actually characterized them as naked. Na kasi, from their standpoint, from their point of view as Europeans, the Filipinos were having fewer clothes compared to them. Kasi iba naman yung kasuotan ng mga Europeans before, with all the robes and all of those habiliments that they actually wore. So, compared sa mga Pilipinos na nakabahag lang. So, para sa kanila, naked daw yung mga Pilipino. Whereas, Pigafetta did not actually realize that those attires were actually appropriate to the hot climate or the hot weather of this country. So, iba kasi yung context. Sa Europeans, they have to wear thicker clothes or habiliments because sa Europe, may maginaw yung weather doon compared sa atin. Mas mainit yung weather sa atin dito. Kaya nga, nararapat lang na yun yung attire ng mga Pilipinos. The indigenous attires, nakabahag lang and walang upper habiliments. Although may ibang mga Pilipino noon meron na mga upper habiliments. Another biased presentation of Pigafetta in this particular document was his characterization of the houses. And when he saw the houses of the Filipinos, sabi niya, poor. They are poor. Kawawa daw sila kasi yung mga bubong ng bahay nila is made up of nipa, made up of kogon. So, which is very different from the Europeans. Sa Europe, iba na. Meron na silang bricks doon. So, this was the presentation. However, Pigafetta was a very narrow-minded person when he presented that. He did not actually realize that it was actually proper for the Filipinos to have that kind of houses. Kasi, again, to fit the environment, the climate of this country. Kasi mainit. And the last biased presentation of Pigafetta was his characterization of the indigenous beliefs of the Filipinos, calling it as inferior, calling it as barbaric in nature. Not only Pigafetta but also Juan de Plasencia in his writings, when he had written that the belief or the indigenous beliefs of the Filipinos were actually barbaric in nature, demonic in nature. They perceive the indigenous belief of the Filipinos as demonic, as barbaric, as blasphemous. What's the reason? Definitely because of the Christian perspective that they actually have. You know, the Spain, the Portugal, they were Catholic kingdoms during these times. And they, when they traveled to the eastern islands, they bring the cross, they bring Christianity. No? And so one of their purposes was to propagate also Christianity. So isa yun sa mga dahilan, napaniwala nila yung ibang mga Pilipino, calling it blasphemy, so, demonic in nature. So isa yan sa mga presentation or bias presentation nila Pigafetta, kasi judging the indigenous belief of the Filipinos as demonic, as barbaric in nature, comparing it to Catholicism, comparing it to the Christian belief that they have in Europe during their time. Last na to, yung presentation ni Pigafetta about the Philippines. Pigafetta was so amazed. No, not only Pigafetta, but even the Europeans. They were so amazed by the presence of ginger, the presence of cocos, yung niyog, the presence of gold in the Philippine Islands. It's actually written in history that the Filipinos before were actually rich in terms of gold. In fact, Pigafetta actually stated in a document that even the king had actually a golden dagger. The house was made up of gold. Nasulat yun ni Pigafetta. In fact, they called the island of Humonhon as the watering place of good signs because they saw the first signs of gold in the island. When the Europeans, led by Magellan, went to Butuan and Caragua, they were introduced to the king of Butuan, which was Raha Colambu and Raha Siago. They were amazed, or Pigafetta actually reported that they saw mines of gold. They saw abundance of gold in the place. And in fact, he had written that even the house of the king was made up of gold, and the king had a golden dagger, and so on. So they were so amazed of the abundance of gold in the place. And this is one of the very reasons why when these people went back to Spain and published this document in Spain, and when the Europeans have read these chronicles, the writings of Pigafetta, a lot of people were very interested to visit these places. A lot of people became so interested, and this is one of the major reasons why we were colonized by Spain. Binalikan tayo, sinakop tayo. Ano ang dahilan? Not because they wanted to spread Christianity. That's a big lie. The very reason was that they wanted to acquire our gold. They wanted to have the abundance of gold that we have in the Philippines. Kasi naman, during their time, there was this idea of mercantilism. The concept of mercantilism in the European societies during their time, in which the wealth of the nation depends on the abundance of gold that they have. The wealth of the nation depends on the amount of gold that they have in their treasury. So that is the very reason why the Philippines was colonized by Spain. And kung titingnan natin, even in the Treaty of Tordesillas, when Portugal and Spain were dividing the world, when the Spain have the western part of the world, while the Portugal had this eastern part of the world. That the Philippines was the only country, or the only country that was held by Spain. In fact, sa Treaty of Tordesillas, dapat yung Pilipinas doon na sa Portugal kasi sakop na sa east. Pero bakit? Bakit? We were colonized by Spain for more than 300 years. The reason is we were very rich in terms of gold. We were very rich in terms of gold. And what happened is that these European people, exploited our natural resources. And kawawang Pilipinas. kawawa ang mga Pilipino. This is Sir Jun, and I hope that you have learned something from this video.